has extended the NBA tournament a couple of more days, and obviously the Ravens back on the field out in Owings Mills. Luke Jones will be out there. We'll be all over it on our Twitter, our Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, everywhere you are, we are. And if you miss anything, you can find it in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Baseball, though, it is summertime, and it's sort of ruling the day every day as the Orioles and the Red Sox battle over first place. There's a whole other thing going on south of the border as well. Down in D.C., Chase Hughes chases the Nationals around with Natitude. He is Chase Hughes, CSN. You can follow him out at Comcast Sports Mid-Atlantic as well. And, Chase, I always say this. You have a wonderful image of Ted Williams in that fantastic Senators gear. I don't know who took that picture. That's fantastic out on the front of your Twitter, man.
Thanks. I've been contemplating changing it, but every time I hear a compliment like that, I think I should keep it.
Well, I mean, it would be nice to know what you look like, but that's fine. Everybody, there's a little Ted Williams. There is some Natitude about that picture for sure, and they weren't even the Nats then. They were the Senators and were affectionately known as the Nats. This year has been everything last year promised to be, and you kind of had to cover the circus last year. This year, I mean, Dusty's kept it on to baseball, and certainly the organization's tightened it up, and the Strasburg signing was exciting. But more than that, when you have the Cubs come to town, it really does sort of bring the circus to town, and sort of lights off the possibilities of what October is going to look like. And I think you could throw the Giants, maybe the Cardinals, maybe the Dodgers, certainly the Mets into that mix. But Nationals and Cubs, this is going to be a season-long story, I think, right?
Certainly. I think this is, obviously it's the best team in baseball. The Chicago Cubs are on pace to put up the best run differential in a long, long time, almost 100 years, I think. So it's a great test for the Nationals, and it's a team that swept them in 4 games just over a month ago in May. So I think the Nationals coming out in the opener on Monday night, that was an encouraging sign to beat the Cubs and do it in a pretty convincing fashion, a pretty complete effort by their pitching staff and their lineup. And also, they were not the team that made the mistakes. The Cubs kind of, for once in a while, looked like a young team that committed some errors and stuff like that. But it's just been a good atmosphere and I think a good series for the Nationals to kind of measure themselves up against the best team in baseball.
Chase, I sit over here and talk about the American League all the time, and I'm constantly talking Orioles and American League East. Feels like the Orioles have been playing the American League East a bunch, whether it's the Yankees, the Red Sox, Toronto. We see them. We're immersed in it, and every time I see one of these teams, I just think about their weaknesses, right? I think about, what's Boston going to want to do at the deadline? They need some pitching at the bottom. The Orioles certainly need some pitching at this point. Toronto could, probably use their batters to hit better. When it comes to the Nationals, what's missing there that would not enable them to beat the Cubs in October? I don't see overt weaknesses, and I don't see a summer where they feel like they have to go out and augment a whole lot about that team right now.
Well, there aren't a whole lot of weaknesses that they can address, but I think you probably look most closely at the bullpen and specifically the back end of it. Do you feel good about Jonathan Papelbon in that closer role? Even though he saved 16 of 18 opportunities this season, not a whole lot of them have been uneventful. And he's particularly had a lot of trouble with the Philadelphia Phillies, which is kind of interesting because that's his former team. It's the team that traded him to the Nationals. But since he got traded to the Nats, it's just been kind of inconsistent. And this team has had a lot of trouble in the past with closers coming up short. Drew Storen, most famously, twice in the playoffs, let them down. And then Rafael Soriano had some moments himself when he was in the closer role. So I think the Nationals are always kind of cautious about that spot, and I'm not sure I'm not sure how they feel at this point about Jonathan Papelbon. I'm sure at the very least it's the spot that they're evaluating over the next 6 or 7 weeks. And, I think beyond that, maybe they could use a left-handed bat. But really, when they're healthy, their lineup is pretty deep and balanced, and you could say the same thing about their bench. I think it's their bullpen, even though some of the numbers suggest it's one of the best in baseball, it's probably an area of the roster that they could still use an upgrade.
Daniel Murphy being, an addition and certainly just incredible this year, and kind of got lost in the shuffle all those years until he became an October superstar, right? And got paid. Some thoughts about new additions and guys coming in from the outside that have mixed this thing up, and more than that, the fact that they stayed with Papelbon. They stayed with, obviously Harper's going nowhere. Now Strasburg's going nowhere. Scherzer has the. They have a nucleus of all of this, but they still added guys in the offseason.
Well, Daniel Murphy has been obviously the biggest addition so far, heading up over 380. He's on pace for a career high in home runs. His career high for homers is 14. He set that last year. But this year he's on pace for 28 or 29 and for about 100 RBIs. So he's turned into a much better player than he even was for a long time in New York.
Yeah, this is a superstar kind of year from him, right? And maybe it's other guys in the lineup. Again, I don't watch the Nats play all that much, but when you see a guy take that sort of monumental step after having a track record of being a nice player, a middling player, to step up and be this kind of player, at least for a couple of months at the front end of a contract, very, very encouraging for how the Nats spent that money, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're already reached the point where you wonder if maybe they bet on someone who was trending up on free agency and may end up having this contract look like a pretty good bargain, because we know that he broke out in the postseason last year for 7 home runs, but that's really carried over, and he credits an adjustment to his swing. So they may have gotten a guy who's unleashed some late career power. Ben Revere has not been quite as good as Daniel Murphy, but he's dealt with an oblique injury. And just lately, he's been kind of coming around with some multi-hit games. In their bullpen, there's been some nice additions. Sean Kelly, namely, has been very, very good over the last year or so. He's actually been one of the better pitchers in baseball. He's not a guy who throws very hard, but he can strike out batters at a very, very high rate, which is always good. And I think at this point, you have to look at him as probably not only one of their most impressive relievers, but maybe the insurance policy for Jonathan Papelbon if anything ever went wrong with him, or if he were to lose that job. I think he'd be the next man up. So I think the Nationals, whether they feel comfortable with him as their 8th inning and 9th inning insurance policy or not, I think that'll dictate a lot once they move towards the deadline.
Really says a lot about the depth of their pitching. You look down and see guys making starts. They haven't had a lot, odd guys making starts. They haven't had 9 pitchers, in starting roles because of injuries, or quite frankly, it's not even injury related. In most cases, guys just suck. We see the Orioles and see Jimenez and see guys that have no business, quite frankly, starting every 5th day. Meanwhile, the Nationals have just sort of chugged along, and where you would have thought Scherzer would be their best pitcher, and on any given night, you're going to give me a game 1, I'm going to start him, but he hasn't even been their best pitcher this year, right?
No, that's right, and that's been probably the part of their roster that they've been most fortunate. There haven't been any injuries. Pretty much everybody has pitched either as good or better than you thought they would have. Scherzer has been a little inconsistent, and lately Gio Gonzalez has been in some trouble. But Joe Ross, for his age at 23, has been exceptional. Tanner Roark has been basically the guy that we saw in 2014 post one of the better ERAs in the National League. He was kind of a disaster last year because they bounced him around in the bullpen and back to the rotation, but he's really kind of regained his form, and then Strasburg is off to the best start of his career. So collectively, their starting rotation looks very, very good, and I think the Nationals, they still have the best pitching prospect in baseball, Lucas Giolito, but at this point, it's honestly not very clear how he's going to correct this rotation, at least in the short term, which is something a lot of us, including me, predicted would have happened already or would be happening pretty soon this season.
Chase Hughes covers all things Nationals down in D.C. for Comcast Sports Mid-Atlantic. You can follow his journey out on Twitter, and many do at Chase Hughes CSN. A lovely picture of Ted Williams, as I pointed out. Chase also co-hosts baseball in the district as well. We're playing baseball up here, and first-place team at Fenway Park this week. They're going to be home this weekend. They've had trouble selling tickets in Baltimore. There's been, as a guy who's done this for 25 years now, in talking about baseball, baseball every day of my life. It feels like it's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. We got Ravens going on. But meanwhile, I mean, to me, the biggest story in sports are these Cubs, right? Aside from the Olympics later in the summer, and if you're into the NBA, and that'll be over soon, the Cubs are going to sort of rule the day all summer long, and there's going to be incredible I say, look, you can win 120 games. You better damn well win game 1 in October, right? And you cover the Nationals, and you know what I'm talking about. What happens in the regular season doesn't mean much come October, but the Cubs feel like they have all of this momentum, and certainly the media is chasing them at this point, too. They're all like moving rock stars at this point coming to town, right?
No doubt. There's a lot of star power on the team, and then you just look at the pace they're on. I'm not sure the exact win pace that they are tracking on right now, but at some point, this is going to turn into a Golden State Warriors type story if they keep it up. The record for wins in the season is 116 by the Seattle Mariners in 2001, and the reason why no one remembers that is because they bowed out early in the playoffs. So the Cubs have a chance to do something really special this year, and their pitching staff in particular. I know everyone looks at the offense and Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo and those guys, but looking at some of the pitching numbers heading into the series, was truly incredible. I mean, the Nationals don't have to see Jake Arrieta or John Lester, their two best pitchers. But the other three guys that were set to face the Nats all had sub-3 ERAs, and all had ERAs that would lead the Nationals. And as a rotation, heading into the series, they had a 2.3 ERA, which if that was attached to an individual pitcher would be 10th in the majors. So basically, they've got a complete staff full of aces right now. And I think that's been the biggest key to their success and the biggest reason why their run differential is reaching historic proportions.
Chase Hughes of Comcast Sportsnet talking all things Nats and Natitude. So, meanwhile, where are the Mets in all of this, right? I mean, we're talking about how good the Nats pitching has been, and it has been. For the Mets, the whole offseason was about their starters, their young guns. Obviously, with the Giants spending money, clearly the Cubs were going to come back and be competitive. The Mets feel like they've gone into a little bit of fade, and are clearly the second-best team in the division. I know there's been some health issues there as well.
Well, that's the thing that is kind of tough to evaluate, is they're behind the Nationals right now, but if you add up all the things that they've had to go through this year, between injuries with Lucas Duda and David Wright, and then between the whole thing that went down with Matt Harvey, and then Jacob deGrom dealt with some issues earlier this year, if you add all that up, you'd think that the division lead would be bigger. So I'm wondering if the Mets aren't hanging around, and maybe at some point they'll hit their stride like they haven't quite yet. And we saw how aggressive they were last year at the deadline, bringing in Tyler Clippard and Yoenis Cespedes. If they end up making the right moves like they did last year, the division race could get a lot more interesting. So I think part of the reason why they're still relatively close to the Nationals, just 4 or 5 games back, is that the Nationals had a really tough schedule in the month of May, and they came out of it pretty well, just above 500. But they haven't had a real opportunity to beat up on some of these lesser teams to kind of create some distance. And I think recently you started to see them do that against the Phillies and the White Sox in particular. They have basically already passed through their toughest stretch of the schedule, the Nationals, and I think the next few weeks is where you'll see a real opportunity for them to create some distance in the NL East.
Well, the Murphy story looms large, too, as a difference maker and an acquisition in the offseason. And there are a lot of really crappy teams in the National League. I mean, I'll say that about the American League. There aren't a whole lot of, you say Tampa's the worst team in the division, but they come in and they bring pitching. There are just some real stinkers from Atlanta and Milwaukee and San Diego, just bad baseball teams in the National League.
Yeah, although the NL East has been better overall than we thought it would be. The Braves are dreadful, as you mentioned, but the Phillies, up until recently, had been one of the surprise teams around baseball. I think the Marlins have done pretty good staying at or right above 500, even with the suspension of D. Gordon. I think Don Mattingly's done a great job over there. So the division's deeper, but there isn't really a second, really, really good team. At least the Mets don't look like that right now, although of course, we've seen what they're capable of, and I think when they do end up hitting their stride this season, they'll look a whole lot better than they do right now.
Chase, always great having you on, man. Keep the attitude rolling. We will be watching from afar. It's always one channel away, right? You know what I mean? The Orioles are here, and then the Nationals are here, and then you guys are over there. And, I see it all because of all my Capitals coverage that I get at Comcast Sports Mid-Atlantic. Always great having you on, man. We'll send everybody out on a Twitter to visit and say hi.
All right, thanks a lot, man.
You got it, Chase Hughes of Comcast Sports Mid-Atlantic. You can follow him out on Twitter at Chase Hughes CS. And you can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We have been streaming live successfully, I might add, on Facebook all week long, as well as on our YouTube WNST TV channel. We're going beta this summer, getting ready for football season. Shh, don't tell anyone. They might listen. You can find me out also anywhere you are on your mobile device by getting the morning newspaper. 7 a.m. It hits your email inbox, all powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never, ever least, that breaking news happens, whether it's bad news on Brashad Perryman on Saturday or better news on Tuesday afternoon. All of that brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports